Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone joining us across different time zone and across different or in corner of the world. My name is Nazila Jamshidi, and I will be moderating today's discussion on behalf of Bahrain Initiative for Development. It's an honor to welcome you to this very, very timely and very deeply necessary conversation, which will be focusing on envisioning Afghanistan trajectory under the Taliban rule. As we all are watching, hearing, and reading every day, Afghanistan today stands at a crossroad, but not a neutral one, as we all can see in the newses and from people on the ground. So it's a crossroad shaped by very, very deliberate policy choices, choices that are redefining who's allowed to learn, who's allowed to work, and ultimately, who's allowed to exist as a full human being in the public life. So, since the tragic event of 2021, we have witnessed two parallel and deeply interconnected processes unfolding in front of our eyes in Afghanistan. So, on one side, we have girls and women have been systematically erased. They are barred from secondary and higher education. They are excluded from most profession and confined to invisibility. And that is very sad and tragic. On the other side, we have boys who are being immersed in an in a kind of an education system that increasingly dominated by ideological indoctrination, where as we all know, critical thinking, science, arts, and all human rights principles are vanished and they are replaced by a singular worldview and the one that the Taliban regime is defining. So there are, as we all know, these are not isolated human rights violation. I'm a human rights person, and I don't call it like human rights violation by itself. They represent a structural transformation for Afghan society, the one that has a profound political, economic, and security implication, not only on Afghanistan, but for the region and the beyond. And that is threatening. When over 3 million girls are denied education, the cost is not a personal tragedy, it's a national disaster. And UNESCO estimated billions in lost economic potential. So, community lost teachers, doctors, engineers, and leaders before they even allowed it to exist. Families fracture and mental health crises deepen. Early and forced marriage are rising dramatically. At the same time, the exponential expansion of the state-backed, or I better to say Taliban-backed madrasa, now numbering in the tens of thousands, and these are combined with the removal of a lot of other subjects that create what many experts nowadays they describe the situation as the cheapest and largest recruitment pipeline that extremist groups have ever seen in decades. So this is kind of a historic thing. So history shows us that radicalization doesn't remain contained within the borders. It travels. It travels through violence, through instability and displacement. And what we are confronting right now is not simply a woman's issue. Is not an education crisis either. It's a question of national security, regional stability, and global responsibility. So, although the situation is really, really bad, yet despite the gravity of the moment, international engagement has been really fragmented. I personally have been in many international platforms and observed, yes, I observed consumption exists, but coherence doesn't exist. So what I saw was the discussion of humanitarian aid are separated from discussion of gender apartheid. And that is sad for a humanitarian person like myself. Counterterrorism is discussed, but without a reference to educational system that fits this counterterrorism. And Afghan voices, especially those inside the country, are frequently treated as a secondary to the calculation, and that is not fair. So this webinar aims to challenge the fragmentation. So today we aim to integrate political, security, economic, and societal lens to better understand Afghanistan trajectory under the Taliban or Afghanistan today's situation. We will ask, of course, we have very knowledgeable panelists in this webinar. And of course, we are going to ask very difficult questions. So in this webinar today, we are going to ask our panelists to talk about international engagement, to be turned in a real leverage. What it involves. We are going to focus on why has the world hesitated to name what is really happening to Afghan women, and that is gender apartheid, and what would change it if they name it. We are going to talk about long-term consequences of raising a generation where one half of the society is erased and the other half is ideologically engineered. And this is dangerous. So also, I should note that the central to this conversation is our commitment to amplifying Afghan voices, women, educators, youth, and scholars whose lived experiences challenge the narrative. It has always did. So despite the extraordinary repression, as we all are witnessing, Afghan society has not surrounded. Underground classroom continue. Intellectual defining persist, and women continue advocating for the rights and dignity of their people in different platforms, in different international stages. So we are honored to be joining today by a very exceptional panel of experts and practitioners, individuals who bring decades, years of experience in security, in education, policy, and Afghan history. So these insights will help us move a little bit beyond the diagnosis and move toward pathways for pipeline section, kind of pipeline action to the cure. So this is not the space of course, I should mention, this is not a space for despair, but neither it is a space for denial. It's a space for clarity, for honesty, and bring some responsibility to the table. As we begin, I invite all participants to approach this discussion with humility and recognizing that what's at stake is not only Afghanistan's future, but the global thing. It really is a global thing. And thank you for being part of this very, very critical question. So I don't want to take a lot of time because my talks is not important. We have an exceptional a panelist here and we want to hear from them. So let us begin with our first panelist, Mr. Ahmad Zia Sarraj, our former Director General of Afghanistan National Directorate of Security. Mr. Sarraj has spent many years working on Afghanistan national security. He closely monitored extremist groups and understanding how they recruit, organize, and expand. So he's very knowledgeable on that. And his experience gives him a clear view of how education, ideology, and security are deeply connected. So today we are going to ask Mr. Sarraj to speak about how the Taliban education system is being used as a tool of indoctrination and why these poses a serious security risk, not only for Afghanistan, but beyond Afghanistan border. So Mr. Sarraj, welcome. We are so honored to have you with us today. The floor is yours. You have 10 minutes uninterrupted.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Jamshidi, and also greetings to Mr. Sample, Mr. Saleh Nishat, and also Greetings to the audience and Ramadan Mubarak to all of them who observe. I will try to conclude my points in five brief, summarize my points in five areas. And I'm sure I will try not to exceed that 10 minutes that I have been given. So thank you very much also for inviting me and having me part of this discussion. I just want to start with point number one, is that there is no doubt that how important it is for all Muslims around the world to acquire education on religious studies. And at this challenging time, that a group of a minority group like Taliban and Al-Qaeda and the others are trying to hijack religion, and they try to misrepresent a religion that has followers, almost a quarter of the humankind of humanity in all over the globe. And in this critical time, it's even more essential for us to understand the reality of Islam and understand the authentic instructions of Islam that has been given to all of us. And of course, it's the terrorist group like Taliban and the others. They try to bring their own interpretations, challenging the reality which is in the religion. I just want to start with an example of my interaction in 2012 with a British officer when I was studying at the UK Defense Academy. One day he came to me and he said that why Islam is so confusing. He said that he has met a number of Muslims who are studying there, that they drink alcohol. And he has also seen a number who abstain, and they say that it's strictly prohibited. So my answer to him was that it's not the instructions in Islam is very clear. Whatever a person does, it lies the responsibility of that particular individual. We should not judge Islam for what a person does. So it's the same with the terrorist groups, that whatever atrocity they are doing around the world, and whatever uh, different interpretations that they are making up from their own, they are not representing Islam. They are just the individuals based on their own understandings that they do it. So because of this, it makes it even more important for all of us to understand the authentic instructions. So then it leads me to my second point. Where can we acquire that education, and how we can understand the reality and the real instructions of Islamic thoughts? Of course, for years, madrasas have been the answer, and traditionally it has been the place that people have relied, and for centuries they have tried to preserve the scholarship, the Islamic values, and they have tried to transmit the knowledge from one generation to the other generation. And when I talk specifically about Afghanistan, in the rural areas of Afghanistan, away from the urban cities, it's a kind of desire for the families to have their children study in madrasas and study religious studies. And that was one of the reasons that during the 20 years of Republic, there were so many efforts made that we should build enough madrasas inside Afghanistan so that we could stop the flow of youngsters who are traveling to Pakistan. And of course, those madrasas had been infiltrated by the extremist circles that I will come to my later points that I will talk about them. So we tried to stop them, but unfortunately, it did not happen. Before I go to the third point, we should also avoid generalization. And in all the studies that I had done during 20 years of my service at the National Directorate of Security, it was very clear that nor all the graduates of madrasas were extremists. Uh, and they were also, not all the suicide bombers studied madrasas. So this is an important point to make, that we should not generalize it. So where the problems start? The problems start that, like the religion that has been hijacked, that has been taken hostage by a small group of people, extremist circles have taken hostage madrasas, and they are misusing these institutions for their own ideas and for their own practices. So for example, uh, talking about madrasas, those days that we were dealing with in Pakistan, uh, the kind of teachings and the kind of lessons they were giving to the students, they were so contrary to the real instructions of Islam. For example, suicide bombing, and any kind of suicide is prohibited clearly in at least two, three verses of Holy Quran. And also there's a clear hadith that says that it's not, it's a big sin. But in those madrasas, it was preached for the students that it's an acceptable act, and they were giving them a lot of incentives to do it. So I had been involved in a number of investigations. We had arrested hundreds of suicide bombers before they committed that crime and before they carried out the attacks. Of course, each of them had different stories, but there were some areas that the pattern showed that there was a clear direction for all of them that they had to follow. First of all, for example, the exploitation. Most of these young people who are made as suicide bombers and suicide attackers were extremely poor people. And that poverty was exploited by these people. The second area was the radicalization process, that these people were radicalized to that extent that they would accept to kill themselves for the cause, that they were given the incentive that you will have eternal happiness, and so on. And these were the messages for a hopeless and poor person. It was so attractive that they would immediately jump and accept it. And the third one was uh, the training. There was a clear division between the groups that were doing the radicalization process, and this process would happen within madrasas. And then after that, once some of the students passed this stage, they would be introduced to the training part. And the trainings were minimum of 6 weeks to maximum of 12 weeks, depending of which type of attack they wanted to carry out. So then, of course, they were sent to their missions. And these people, of course, as I said, they were badly exploited. They they were also in the process of radicalization. For example, they were shown some deceptive porn videos, and they normally associated those videos to the coalition forces in Afghanistan, just to make them like eager and make them ready to go for those attacks. So now that we know the process, unfortunately, the evil process that some of these people were exploited in some of these madrasas, I just want to come to my fourth point, that what is the number? How many people we are talking about? There is no doubt that in those years that we were dealing with, it was the biggest source of recruitment for Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and the other groups. Now, what's happening in Afghanistan is that, of course, there are some numbers like 25,000 madrasas in Afghanistan. I don't believe that these numbers are accurate because there is a clear evidence that some of these madrasas are just on the paper. It's for the corruption of the Taliban senior leaders themselves that they have made these madrasas for extortion of money from the businessmen, from the other internal and external sources. So while I don't agree with the numbers presented by the Taliban, I also agree with the fact that the number of the people who have been hired in these madrasas, it's way higher than we used to have in the past. And some of madrasas have been built by Al-Qaeda affiliates. For example, in Ghazni province, huge madrasas that they can house thousands of people at the same time. And the mentality is very clear for Al Qaeda and the affiliates that how they want to exploit these people. Uh, if we take the number of the people, it's very hard. I don't want to insist on any numbers that I'm giving. So approximately, or in rough estimates, there are around uh, between 2 to 3 million people right now who are studying in these madrasas. And if we also take the number of the people studying in Pakistani madrasas, the official statistics show that they are around 3 million, but with the unregistered madrasas, it could be around 3.5 million. So it means that we have a combination, if we combine all these numbers, because the terrorist groups, they have access to all of them, to all these madrasas. So we have around 5 million people studying in these madrasas who are ready to be exploited, and some of them to that extent of extremism and to that extent to do a suicide mission or something similar to that. If we, just for the sake of um, argument here, if we believe that 80% of them are just like normal people, they have received normal education, the true Islamic kind of education that they deserve to receive, if even 20% of this number becomes extremist to that extent that they would be in search of a fight somewhere in this world, we are talking about 1 million people, and that is a big number that could be exploited. So my point number 5 and the last one, the future implications. It's very worrying. It's a very dark and dangerous kind of prediction. The problem is if we assume that this 1 million people have been radicalized, and these are the people who are ready to go and to take part in some kind of fight somewhere in the world. And they are also facing poverty, lack of job opportunities. They are so easy prey to very rich groups who are sitting there. These terrorist groups are way richer today than they ever were. Their illicit the gains they get from the illicit economy, from the transnational crimes to the exploitation of the natural resources in Afghanistan and to so many other businesses, illicit businesses that they are involved. They are very rich, and these people can easily exploit this huge number youngsters who have no hope and who have no other opportunity. They can easily fall to the trap of the extremism. And the second thing, or the third element which makes this combination very lethal and deadly is the presence of the terrorist groups in Afghanistan with global ambition. Some of these groups that they are now in Afghanistan and they are operating with immunity, they haven't come here to stay in Afghanistan. They always wanted to go beyond the borders of Afghanistan and to bring changes, government changes within their own countries. We see the TTP, we see the IMU, we see the ATIM, and all of them they have global ambition. So now we have people ready to be exploited. We have money which comes from the illicit economy for all these groups, and we also have the global ambition. If we combine all these three elements, it's very, very clear that we are facing a ticking bomb in Afghanistan. It can explode at any time, which will definitely plunge Afghanistan to some of the darkest eras that we had never seen before. And it will also not keep intact the rest of the neighboring countries and the other parts of the world. So I hope I did not exceed my time. I will stop here. Of course, I will be happy if there are any questions. Thank you.
Well, not at all. Thank you. Thank you so very much for the all the insight you just shared. It's very, very important. Of course, I have a couple of following question, which I will come back to you. But I truly appreciate you emphasizing on avoiding generalization. So, and for me, it's very important to understand the danger of radicalization and increasing number of madrasa inside the country, but also like avoiding calling all Afghans like a part of a terrorist groups, or like brainwashed kind of a people. Not everyone migrate from the country right now from Afghanistan to other countries is a radicalized or brainwashed kind of a person. So I thank you for emphasizing on that. And of course, I will come back to you with some follow-up question. But before that, I like to turn into the role of international community, which is very important. Nowadays, all we have, of course, we have our children, we have our people, leaders outside the country, we have our diaspora, but we also have international community whose support is very important for all Afghan people. So I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Michael Semple from Queen's University Belfast and the former UN and EU representative for Afghanistan. Professor Semple, you have long worked on international engagement and especially with Afghanistan, and understand both its intention and limitation. And today we are going to ask you, we would like for you to reflect on whether the current international engagement has helped kind of create pressure for change on the current regime or not. And also whether it has unintentionally allowed Taliban's policies, especially toward women and girls, to continue without any consequences. So Professor Sample, again, thank you for joining us. Please go ahead. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you for convening this. Thank you for all the other participants. Thank you in particular for my dear colleague, the Siraj, for his starting comments. Yeah, I will tell you some of my thoughts on the state of international engagement, but I want to root it in understanding what the Taliban are doing. I think one of the problems in dealing with Afghanistan is that uh, Afghans have so often been outward looking rather than inward looking, and have sometimes spent too much time at considering what the internationals are going to do. And that has led to, on the one hand, a significant lack of Afghan agency, that they sort of a willingness to surrender agency to international forces, or an expectation that Afghan agency is impossible. But it also means that Afghan forces that understand this can be ahead of the others. And I think the Taliban have been spectacularly successful over the past few years at exploiting their international relations. I often said that it was deeply ironic that during the period of insurgency, as you know, with horror, we watched the growing strength of the Taliban, that they weren't just fighting an insurgency war with Kalashnikovs and IEDs. They were involved in a contest of public finance, and in some ways, the Taliban at that stage, their effort was led by this chap Gulaga Isakzai, that of course the Siraj will be very familiar with, who did a stint as Taliban's finance minister after takeover, is currently their mines minister. In many ways, that Gulaga led a more effective revenue-raising exercise than the Republic, and that put the Taliban into a position where they were able to run the successful insurgency and exploit the desire of the Americans to get out quickly at the end. And so, in trying to understand this, what are the internationals up to, and what does it mean? Actually, we have to keep on looking at how the Taliban are using it. Currently, that Afghanistan has dropped down the priority list for almost all the elements of the international community are well aware of that. The very fact that we're still hearing from the Trump administration into their second year that expect an Afghan policy from us. That in itself is a statement that they haven't yet adopted an Afghanistan policy. I absolutely agree with Zia's assessment that there is a growing risk from extremism under the Taliban in Afghanistan, and that development in Afghanistan and the region may force it back up the agenda. When we look at the regional powers, I think anybody who's followed this is well aware that after seeing the US's willingness to do a deal with the US with the Taliban through the Doha Agreement, and then the Taliban's spectacularly successful leverage of that to topple the Republic, all countries in the region adopted a policy of at least limited engagement with the Taliban. None of them was prepared to confront the Taliban. We've seen now almost some competition in deepening that engagement. In particular, some of that has been led by Russia, with at the very least the countries in the region have been willing to have diplomatic exchanges, with the exception of Russia, short of full recognition, and willingness to have at least limited economic exchange, exploiting the vacuum led by those people the Western powers, which have been less willing to engage economically. However, and this is where I said come back to the Taliban approach. During the insurgency, the Taliban were spectacularly successful in exploiting opacity. They gave completely misleading indications around their intentions. Or you're well aware, 10 years of quite intense engagement, supposedly around a peace process, which the Taliban diplomats assigned to that process extremely expertly created this convenient story of a reformed movement that, if as a consequence of Western military withdrawal, they had some role in government, of course, it would be greatly reformed. This was a myth which provided a convenient cover for those figures, essentially in the US administration, that wanted to preside over the US withdrawal. That provided the political cover. The story that the Taliban were prepared to engage in a political settlement, and if they did so, that they would not pose a threat. This, I would say, was a long strategic game by the Taliban. I know that they certainly, any of the research that I did inside of that period, inside the Taliban during that period, indicated the Taliban were fully committed to achieving complete control over Afghanistan and had no intention of either power sharing or reforming their process. But again, to them, it goes, if you just look, if you want to, in this Trumpian era, judge by results, they were spectacularly effective and successful, that they pulled off the great lie. The sort of the nice Taliban that many people sat with in exercises in Japan or France or Germany or Norway, and ultimately in Doha, the nice Taliban like Shahabuddin Dilawar and Sher Mohammad Abbas, Nikhat Stanakzai, people, and people like this, who seemed, fairly sincere in their vision of their part in a plural Afghanistan. They had no authority to deliver on any of those things. And I think that in terms of the Taliban international relations now, that they're essentially involved in the same process, trying to have broad international relations. They're very good at putting out feelers within the region, the wider region, even into Western countries, delegations to China, Russia, see the Americans and the Europeans. They conduct a wider diplomacy. Of course, they try and assuage any concerns. I believe Zia's concerns are absolutely spot on. That the threat of extremism from Afghanistan is strong, growing. I would say, first of all, applies to the region and clearly has a wider threat as well. In other words, attacks conceived of in or inspired by Afghanistan playing out in countries of the West, that is there, but the immediate threat is to the region. And that, of course, is where you get this dilemma of the current, the regional element of the engagement. Any serious security actor in any of the Central Asian countries, in Iran, and in Pakistan, as they look at the Taliban, have to reach similar conclusions to what Zia Siraj just presented to us. That for Pakistan, it is not a theoretical threat, it is an immediate one, where every day you can get the body count of the Pakistan army with attacks which have been supported by Taliban Afghanistan. That from previous knowledge of the Taliban that Zia has himself given just now, ongoing research into attitudes inside the movement, including leadership and the ranks, suggests that it is that the intention eventually of supporting operations to threaten the states in Iran and Central Asia, that the intention is already there. Timing is a matter of how the leadership plays out its current level of opacity, its big lie strategy. They're concerned about consolidating. They expect to be fighting for many years in the future. I think they're not ready for a full-scale confrontation yet. They've been absolutely clear that they are a strategic actor. The Taliban have built on the public finance expertise of Gulaga in the insurgency to run effective post-takeover public finance, which means that they balance their budget without being dependent on budgetary support from any external actor, which means that as far as they're concerned, they are not subject to any external leverage at a time, well, in a sense, like Putin, they've insulated themselves from domestic opinion in Afghanistan. They don't have to listen to Afghan concerns, to hungry Afghan concerns, because they have put in place the sort of the ideological project to justify everything they're doing as running an Islamic State that no Muslim dare take a stand against, and they are running an effective authoritarian apparatus which aims to suppress any opposition. So coming down to then this issue of the international engagement, the broader international community hardly engaged in Afghanistan, probably will only re-engage when the threats that Zia has talked about present themselves more clearly. But inside the region, the threats are more immediate, and I think that the limited engagement that we've seen so far, it's not sustainable, and probably Pakistan will lead the way in tilting the regional consensus away from essentially playing along with the Taliban, and probably we will see attempts to apply more pressure on them. But the Taliban are several steps ahead. They, as far as they're concerned, they've insulated themselves from leverage or pressure. So let's see how it played out. But I mean, overall, everything that Zia has said, I agree with it, and I could provide multiple examples and explanations to say the threat is every bit as bad as Zia has described, both for the Afghan population and for the neighbors of Afghanistan.
Professor Simple, thank you so much for all the insight. I really appreciate your thought on everything. And since we have a little bit of time, from 10 minutes, so I would like to take this opportunity, although I want to be very respectful to the order and structure of this webinar, but I really like to take this opportunity to ask this a question from you. And actually, I want you to unpack a little bit on this. So you talked about Afghan agencies, which is a major concern nowadays among every Afghan diaspora, everywhere I go, from North America to Europe to Middle East. So in international community policy on Afghanistan. So I would like for you to unpack it a little bit more. I would like for you to explain, how do you see it? What is the main obstacle? Why do you think these Afghan diaspora feel they are unheard, not unheard enough? Not heard enough in when shaping the policy, when crafting the policy related to Afghanistan. How do you see it?
First of all, just a few more sentences on the Taliban. For many years, I believe that analysts, whether Afghan or international, underestimated the Taliban. I would be quite happy to sort of run out what the Taliban project is they're doing. They have a vision for transforming Afghan society. They have, I would, it's a highly instrumentalist use of Islam. Thinking back to what Zia also said, they have mobilized a small part of Afghan society, but still a part of Afghan society to deliver that. They're sort of running out a vanguard state. And there is no foreign advisor telling them they have to do this. There's nobody pulling the strings. This is an Afghan movement that has history, that has political culture, which actually can look, when the Taliban sort of try to explain where they've come from, they can name to you, literally hundreds of figures in Afghan history who played a role. Well, first, of course, they assert that their people were involved in the anti-Soviet jihad as well. That they can list to you their people who were involved in sort of various uprisings against the monarchy. How their figures were involved in the fight against the British during the three Anglo-Afghan wars. Anyway. They have history, they have a place in Afghan society, they have a mission that they're trying to do. But of course, many people try to say, oh, they're just proxies of Pakistan. Essentially, there's somebody pulling the strings. Madrasa students couldn't pull this off. Well, I'm afraid, gradually we have to accept, yes, they have. They are an effective Afghan movement. So when it comes to this issue around the diaspora, the rest of Afghan society, on one level, that Afghan society it's not mobilized. That there's been this sense, the sense was created during, and it grew up during the Republic, that they even they're taking the easily accessible indicators of democratic mobilization, participation in the electoral process. It's a straight line going downwards from the initial exercises in 2004 right to the final presidential election. People being either physically unable or unwilling to participate in a democratic process, and reaching a situation where Afghans essentially concluding that there's nothing we can do. When it comes to the issue of the Afghan diaspora, I think that the question is almost the wrong question when they say, oh, our voices are not being heard in making Afghan policy. No, the question is, which Afghan movement are you a part of, which is articulating your views? That's the issue, and that's what Taliban have exploited. Currently, Afghan society is not mobilized. Most of the complaints that we hear are complaints why the European Union, or why His Majesty's government in Britain or whatever, they don't listen to the Afghans. The UN, oh, they don't invite us to the meetings. That's, for me, fundamentally irrelevant. Afghanistan is now not a high priority for the international community. However, there is a deeply unpopular, and I would say ultimately unsustainable regime pursuing its project in Afghanistan, contrary to the political aspirations of the majority of Afghans, contrary to Afghan culture, and they will continue to do that successfully until two things happen. That there is a mobilization, not a mobilization to influence the policies of international actors, the mobilization of movement, or essentially of a freedom movement. When there is an effective when there's effective Afghan freedom movement that people in the diaspora find ways of participating in, and inside Afghanistan find ways of participating in, which despite all the talk about Taliban authoritarianism, there are always ways to mobilize. And of course, that we know that doing it in complete isolation is difficult when the conditions in the region are more propitious. For example, when Pakistan or other states decide that the Taliban pose such a threat that they will be generally supportive of those Afghans mobilizing against them, then we will see things change. But as long as Afghan society is demobilized, the Taliban will continue to push through with their project.
Completely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you. So, so far we have talked about a lot of security risk, a lot of international policies, and now I think it's a time to focus on what people outside government can do. I understand Professor Sample a little bit touched on Afghan diaspora, but it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Zalmay Nishad, who's founder and executive chair of Mosaic Global Foundation. Mr. Nishad works very closely with a lot of Afghan communities and diaspora to support education, civil society, and peaceful resistance effort. So he is very, very much knowledgeable on the role of diaspora and Afghan people outside Afghanistan border. And today we would like for you, Mr. Nishad, to share some thoughts on where real influence and leverage still exists, if there is any, and especially from those formal diplomacy that has reached, its limit. Now we have diaspora, we have our children outside, we have our thought leaders, we have our academic features outside. How do you see their role? Mr. Nishad, welcome and thank you for being with us. You have, please go ahead, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jamshidi. I will respond to your question directly at the end. Also, I have similar to Mr. Sarraj, 5 points to make, and then the 5th point is directly, hopefully will be a response to your question. But first of all, let me thank sincerely the Bahrain Initiative for Development for organizing this timely and necessary conversation. I also would like to thank Mr. Nasser Saleh for the kind invitation. Also, it is an honor to join Mr. Zia Sarraj and Professor Michael Semple, whose work and insights I have long admired, and I have the honor of working with them very closely on Mosaic's conferences at the University of Cambridge called Cambridge Afghanistan Series. Also, I would like to thank Ms. Jamshidi yourself for the brilliant work that you do raising the voice of Afghanistani women, and for the excellent moderation today in today's event. As I basically mentioned, I'll try to kind of make the 5 points that I have based on the 3 recent articles I have published, 2 of them in the national interest in December and January, as well as one at the Manara magazine published by Cambridge Middle East and North Africa Forum, MENAF. And basically, my argument would be that the Taliban are trying to re-engineer Afghanistani society through deliberate multi-layer project built on 5 pillars. Indoctrination, that's Mr. Sarraj mentioned, gender apartheid through systematic exclusion of women from public life, cultural and linguistic erasure, which I have called attempt of civilizational erasure, to impose monolithic identity and interpretation of Islam. Also, the 4th, promotion of extremism and regional destabilization, which is the implication, and as the structural outcome of the ideological project of the Taliban. And number 5, brutal suppression of the democratic alternative, diversity and pluralism, making resistance a combination of armed and self-resistance essential for our future transformation. So basically, the Taliban, this is not governance. It is a generational strategy to reshape Afghanistan's future and export instability beyond its borders. And most of these points that I made were basically articulated by 2 of our earlier speakers. I will expand all of these 5 points very quickly before reaching a conclusion. Indoctrination through the madrasa expansion and ideological state project. Drawing on my first article published on 15th of December last year at the national interest, basically, I would argue, according to reports from the Taliban Ministry of Education, between 23 to 25,000 madrasas have been built in the past 4.5 years. Based on some statistics, around 2 million boys and about 1.5 million girls have been enrolled in these madrasas. But again, we have to be, as Mr. Sarraj mentioned, we have to be wary of the statistics because we have different numbers. These institutions are designed to produce loyal ideological class, future administrators, fighters, religious police, and propagandists. The curriculum is dominated by Deobandi jurisprudence of the Taliban interpretation, jihadist narrative, obedience to the Amir, and rejection of pluralism, democracy, and women's rights as alien values. This is how the Taliban are constructing human infrastructure of a long-term totalitarian regime. The issue of gender apartheid, systematic erasure of women from society. The Taliban's ban on girls' education beyond primary school is not merely misogyny, it's a political strategy. This is to silence half of the population, to prevent women from shaping public discourse, and to ensure future generations are raised in a closed ideological ecosystem, and to align girls' madrasa enrollment with the Taliban's broader project of control. The Taliban understand that educated women are the strongest antidote to extremism. That is precisely why they are excluded, and we must be cautious. Reducing Afghanistan's crisis to women issue or relying on slogans like "let her learn" are not constructive. As I wrote in the national interest piece, quote, "A school reopened only to impose indoctrination is not liberation. It is consolidation of authoritarian or totalitarian control. End of quote. We must remember the democratic opposition's task is systematic transformation, not cosmetic reform. On the third point, which is the Taliban's attempt of cultural and civilizational erasure, or the battle for identity. Drawing on my Manara magazine article published by the Cambridge Middle East and North Africa Forum, MENAF, I argued that the Taliban's project extends to identity, language, and culture. Persian, central to Afghanistan's literary and cultural inheritance, which is part of the largest civilizational heritage, is being systematically marginalized, continuing the long-standing fascist policies of some past administrations. The Taliban are promoting monolithic Afghan or Pashtun-centric national identity, erasing pluralistic fabric that has defined our shared civilization for centuries. This cultural engineering reinforces their ideological project: one language, one narrative, one interpretation of Islam, and one political authority. When you control language, you control imagination. When you control imagination, you control the future. On extremism, the fourth point that I wanted to make, why Afghanistan terrorism problem will persist. As argued in my second national interest piece, and as Mr. Siraj has highlighted, the Taliban's ideological education system feeds directly into persistence of terrorism. Economic collapse pushes families to send children to madrasa for food and basic services. The Taliban exploit this vulnerability to create a pipeline of radicalized young men and indoctrinated future mothers. These children are being not shaped as citizens, but subjects of the emirate. The regional consequences are already visible. In South Asia, Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and Balochistan provinces have been destabilized. Suicide attacks have reached Islamabad. In Central Asia, Afghanistan-Tajikistan border has been we see increased instability, including the killing of the 5 Chinese nationals recently. Pakistan, Tajikistan, and China are increasingly alarmed. This is why Afghanistan's terrorism problem is structural, not episodic. So basically, coming to directly to your question, democratic resistance. It requires the opposition to the Taliban, which is the democratic opposition, needs 3 C's: coherence, coordination, and cooperation. If the Taliban's project is systematic, then the response must also be systematic. The armed resistance, civil resistance, and political group must build coherence, coordination, and cooperation in order to agree on a unified strategy for change, develop a shared vision for Afghanistan's future, establish a fair mechanism for historic political settlement in a post-Taliban situation, to start a regional dialogue for peace, to change, basically to agree on a change in Afghanistan, and hopefully the changes that we see, in Pakistan will help this to happen. Encouragingly, the democratic opposition has made significant progress. The Vienna process for democratic Afghanistan has brought together over 50 military, civil, and political groups under one umbrella. The comprehensive composite roadmap launched by Mosaic Global Foundation represents a shared vision for Afghanistan's future. The CCR is the product of 2 years of deliberation within the Cambridge Afghanistan series, an annual conference held at the University of Cambridge by Mosaic Foundation, combining 20 roadmaps into one unified document. To support meaningful change, the following must be considered by the democratic opposition, obviously. Support the democratic opposition, including the CCR and the Vienna process. Protect and promote linguistic and cultural diversity, including Persian, Uzbeki, and other Afghanistani languages. Support Mosaic, the initiatives like the Mosaic has, which is in alternative pathways to education, including underground schools for girls and digital learning models. Strengthen regional cooperation. to counter extremist narrative, recognize that the battle for Afghanistan's future is being fought in classrooms, in madrasas, and in the cultural sphere. Education and identity are the front lines. My concluding remarks is that the Taliban project is a coherent system of control built on indoctrination, gender apartheid, civilizational and cultural erasure, and cultivation of extremism. These are not isolated policies. They are the 5 pillars of generational strategy to reshape Afghanistani society and export instability across the region. The only viable counterweight is a unified, coherent, coordinated democratic resistance, grounded in pluralism, cultural diversity, and educational freedom. Afghanistan stands at crossroads. One path leads to entrenched totalitarianism and regional insecurity, the other to a pluralistic democratic future shaped by its own people. I look forward to discussion and learning from my fellow panelists. Thank you very much.
Well, very thoughtful statement, very powerful statement. Thank you so very much, Mr. Nishat. Of course, just similar to other speakers, I have some follow-up questions for you, but I will get back to you later. So now, well, thank you all the speakers for those very, very thoughtful remarks and very necessary remarks. So now we want to move into a panel discussion to connect this perspective together. I am just told that Professor Simple has another business to take care of. So I would like to ask the first round of questions from Professor Simple, just to be respectful of his time and his other businesses. So Professor, well, again, thank you so much for all the insight you just shared. I have been following your work for a long time, and I truly appreciate your every effort and every understanding that you have from Afghan history and people and our culture. So my question for you is that what would a real and principled engagement with the Taliban look like? And let me actually clarify this. I am in different platform, and unfortunately, from different sources, we are told on these principles, so-called principled engagement. Yes, we had the opportunity to ask for clarification and a little bit of explanation on that, but still I'm having a hard time to digest and understand that so-called principled engagement. But I would like for you to talk about it. What if there is or should be any principled engagement? How would you think it should be to respect Afghan diaspora and the voices of Afghan victim of the violation and so on? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this important question. If I were coming up with a list of things to do to advance the cause of freedom in Afghanistan, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, principled engagement with the Taliban at the moment would be very low down the list. I would go back to some of the things that Zulmayjan was listing for trying to ensure a cohesive and effective democratic opposition. I'd be going back to the things which I was pointing towards, effective mobilization against the Taliban. I would be coming up with things like, for example, again, I was very much taken by some of the points that the Siraj made at the start about the Taliban are legitimizing their rule and intimidating anybody considering standing against it by propagating a version of Islam which is very different from what most non-Taliban scholars of Islam recognize. So challenging that effectively would be high on the list. The low down on the list of things to do is engagement with the Taliban. One of the reasons that I say that it is a low priority, is this somehow principled engagement with the Taliban, is that one of the characteristics of the Taliban movement has been its cohesiveness, its discipline, and its consistent use of the principle which they called etat ba'amir, that the ultimate authority, with authority going down to the lowest level of detail, rests with their Amir al-Mu'mineen, and that if, for example, you were to try and plot some kind of meeting between, say, civil society and representatives of the Taliban movement, wherever you held it, ultimately, as long as the Taliban state is in place and the principle of etat ba'amir prevails, the best you could hope for is that whoever the Taliban put into the room, they would ultimately be there as a spokesperson for the Amir Haibatullah, that or a messenger who could note down messages and deliver them to Kandahar. I say Kandahar, not Kabul. But now, 4.5 years into Taliban rule, much of the opacity that I talk about has had to fall away because they have been practically ruling. We know they are fully committed to gender apartheid. And the idea that principled engagement with them is going to reveal anything new or change that, I find frankly ridiculous. Some engagement, of course, is necessary for now. In particular, states in the region and more broadly have got issues that they have to deal with, which are, you can say, day-to-day issues that pertain to Afghanistan, and only the state actor, the de facto rulers, can deal with them. For example, if some country wants to deport Afghans who they consider not entitled to stay in their country, there's no good them talking with the democratic opposition, and we might try to tell them it's a bad idea doing this. They will have to talk with the Taliban authorities. If the Iranians want to address issues of water rights on the Helmand River, they have to deal with the Taliban. Now that's pragmatic day-to-day engagement has to take place. Another form of political engagement we know does happen, but it doesn't happen announced and in big conferences. It's with the dissenting voices inside the Taliban who cannot dissent openly, or otherwise they lose their position, they lose their effectiveness, but they do exist. There is some sense in them being involved in the kind of the question you put for this panel about envisaging a future Afghanistan. Some elements of the Taliban do not have the courage to break with their leadership, but they can envisage an Afghanistan beyond the current totalitarian system. Perhaps it's worth speaking to them. I personally, if I were prioritizing engagement with the Taliban, I would say put it on hold until mobilization by inside the democratic elements of Afghan society and changes in the stance of the regional actors put the Taliban in a position where essentially they realize they can no longer hold onto their monopoly of power. Then suddenly engagement with the Taliban starts to become relevant. Until then, it is largely irrelevant. And I would say, I mean, for this, to some extent, one can think of the dilemma that the Ukrainians are facing at the moment. They're under immense pressure to engage with the Russians. They sort of have to go along with that because they feel that they would face adverse political consequences if they didn't do it. But ultimately, they say, as long as the other party, essentially, the Amir al-Mu'mineen of Russia, is committed to pursuing the war, they say our engagement can achieve nothing. Currently, that is the position on engagement with the Taliban.
Certainly. Thank you so much, Professor. I understand you have to leave. I understand you have something else to do. But before you leave, there is another area which I really like our participants to hear your perspective on. And that is the issue of gender apartheid. This is a campaign I have been engaged from day one, and I love it. This is one of the most authentic campaign that I have ever seen among Afghan women and Afghan community in general. Like, everyone is talking about it. Mr. Nishad has touched on it in his writing, in his work a lot. I mean, everyone is talking about it, everyone is concerned about it, and we have been working very hard to convince international community to codify it as a crime against humanity. But we have been, I mean, we made a lot of progress in this campaign, which is very, very, which is a big success for Afghan community. But there have been a lot of countries, a lot of nations who have been hesitant to call it exactly as it is, and that's a gender apartheid. Why do you think is that? Talk about that, please.
Part of the legacy of the way that the US chose to exit Afghanistan is that there's been a sustained effort to obfuscate the strategic intent of the Taliban movement. Essentially, the way that and look, he's an extremely clever and effective person, the Ambassador Khalilzad, but he was also the architect of that political approach to the exit from Afghanistan. It involved essentially an exercise in apology for the Taliban, explaining their good intent and explaining the prospect of some kind of pluralism with the Taliban back in power or in a share of power. And that the legacy of the several years of lobbying that it will be okay, that you just give them a chance and so on, means that I think that people are still people are prepared to say, oh, it's not so bad. Oh, you don't understand. Oh, give them a chance. But the thing is that the evidence is absolutely clear. So that what your campaign has to do is, of course, you come up with a political strategy to work out, what is motivating various actors. But the strongest sort of tool that you have is the evidence. We have the evidence of Taliban actions. That's, it's apartheid. It looks like apartheid. And we also have the evidence from Taliban ideology. You read the doctrinal texts that the Taliban use as the roadmap for their state building, and I mean there are various of them are involved. I mean the most clear that is currently available to us is the treatise on the Islamic Emirate by their Supreme Court Chief Justice Abdul Hakim Issaczai, who is of course the co-accused in the ICC case. He is absolutely clear in providing his ideological case for the complete removal of women from public life, doubles down on these weird theories of Naqlul Aql that and comes up with a full doctrinal statement that the role of the woman, the place of the woman, is in the home and nowhere else. That there is a doctrinal commitment to gender apartheid. There is a practice of gender apartheid. There is a residual problem with people who still have, who are still affected by the Zulmay Khalilzad policy. But I think as the security threat posed by the Taliban becomes clearer, those people who've stuck with the Taliban lobbyist position, hopefully they will be weakened, and your campaign will be successful. The evidence counts in your favor.
Well, thank you so very much, Professor Sampol, for your participation, for sharing all the insight with our participant and Afghan community today. You have been such a strong supporter to Afghan and such a good friend to Afghans and Afghanistan for a long, long time. We truly appreciate your support. So thank you for your participation. I understand you have to leave. If you want to leave, please feel free. If there is any question by the audience and participants post to you, I will note it and make sure it reach you. Thank you so much.
I'll be delighted. Thank you very much.
Sure. So now let's go back to Mr. Saraj. Mr. Saraj, thank you so much. You talked a lot about a lot of good information over radicalization, over these indoctrination of Taliban ideology inside the country. So I would like for you to talk a little bit or ask you what point does the indoctrination of children and youth, which is such a huge concern for all of us, right, become like a serious threat beyond Afghanistan? Are you seeing any warning sign that the world, unfortunately, is not paying attention enough to it? Is there anything you really want to warn the world over those signs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, unfortunately, when it comes to the children, the exploitation, there are families who hand over their children as young as 7 or as young as 8 years old because they have so many children and they are so poor that they think free meal at least or free clothing in madrasa is a kind of incentive for them, and they hand over the kids very young to these madrasas that I explained earlier, that how these madrasas have been taken hostage by some rich and extremist elements. The problem for these kids are that first of all, for that kind of kid to be away from parental love and to be away from the love that parents can give to them, and then they go to the circles that they are constantly exploited, and there are so many sad stories that happens to these children until the age they become grown up, and they become like monsters because away from family, away from that kind of love that they could receive from the family, they become monsters and they become very uh, depressed people that they're ready to do anything to harm others. They have no hope for life and they have no hope for the future. And some of them that I've personally met, as I said, some of the suicide bombers that we had taken, and I had a chance to read their interviews, they don't have any hope, and they think that in this life, when they cannot marry, when they cannot make a decent life, and when they cannot make a decent living, so the best thing for them is just to follow the instructions of their instructors and go to paradise sooner than later. And then in the paradise, you get all the beauties and all the incentives that you can have. So overall, the children have been exploited so badly in all these areas. But coming back to that point, that how can we present it to the world? I think what Mr. Sample said earlier, it's very deep and meaningful. Afghanistan has become irrelevant to the world and so many priorities that now they have. Afghanistan does not come to even to some of them priority number 20 or priority number 25. So even if they see these things, the easiest way is to ignore. It doesn't mean that they don't know it. They know it, but it doesn't fall in that circle of their priority. Gone are those days that Afghanistan was at the top of the agenda of everyone. Uh, it will be a hard work for all of us to make campaigns like gender apartheid that you already touched upon. There is every evidence when it comes to gender apartheid, every kind of evidence that group called Taliban, based on their policies and based on their practices, they have deprived the women from the rights that they should have and the rights that the religion, the Islam, that has given to them. They're depriving them from that. Yet the world tries to make excuses and bring a lot of counter arguments and it has become so difficult for them to accept that it's a gender apartheid. So the same thing with the children. They know it, people know it, we all know it. There's plenty of evidence. And there are groups that are calling themselves for the advocacy of the children. But when you present these cases for them to just look into it and to help in a way that they can, like gender apartheid, they will bring you a lot of excuses and they will convince you that probably you need to work harder and collect more evidence before they can take it serious.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, that's unfortunately the problem. Gratefully, we are very well equipped with a lot of very well trained advocate talking and advocating for codification of gender apartheid every day in different platform, in different stages. We have our women constantly explaining and posing different evidences, putting on the table of policymakers, but still we are having hard time to convince the world to call it exactly what it is. So thank you so much for that. And you are right. That's the same thing about the children and radicalization. We have every sign and a UN report, annual report of 2025, which was published in December 2025. It clearly says that there are a lot of extremist groups operating and active inside Afghanistan, but I think world decided to not pay attention. So before I move to Mr. Nashad for asking some follow-up question, I would like to ask our participant and audiences who are watching us through different platforms. If you have any question, please feel free to pose your question, and we are more than happy to take it and have our speakers to provide some insight over that. But now let me move to Mr. Nashad for another question. So, Mr. Nashad, I mean, in your opinion, what makes resistance effective rather than kind of symbolic? I understand Professor Simple talked about, like, a real need for real mobilization. And we have seen a lot of, like, resistance effort here and there by different group of Afghans, by different group of former leaders. So what, in your opinion, what makes them effective? What do you think about those?
Thank you very much. I think this is a very, very important question, one that needs a lot of reflection, but there's an easy answer and there's a complicated answer. The easy answer is that Taliban, I mean, the Taliban have now taken over the geography of Afghanistan. They have taken over the state. Also, they have inherited billions worth of ammunition left behind by the Americans and the NATO. Also, in 2022, I wrote a piece when the Taliban were just for 1 year in power. I said in that piece, which was published in Newsweek, that the international community is sending around $14 million on a weekly basis through cash plates to Afghanistan under the guise of humanitarian assistance. If those funds were stopped, the Taliban would not be able to consolidate their power. That was very bluntly, so given the Taliban has taken over Afghanistan, given they have inherited so much ammunition, given they had I mean, I disagree. I hope he was here, as Professor Semple. He's a close colleague of mine. We work very closely together, and he always is present in our conferences in Cambridge. He said the Taliban are part of the fabric of Afghanistan. I absolutely disagree. The Taliban were a product of the madrasa system in the, I mean, maybe hopefully Mr. Sarraj will comment on this as well. The Taliban are a product of geopolitics from the infrastructure that was created in AFPAC region through madrasas. So basically, to make it very simple, now they have the geography and the control. The only way to challenge them is through armed resistance. And the problem with armed resistance is that, I mean, I mentioned that how the whole West is buzzword is engagement with the Taliban. And you previously asked this question about engagement. Also, the region is the same. You know, the regional countries, all of them were, their buzzword has always been engagement with the Taliban. So there's been no space for the regional countries and international community to assist the armed resistance of the people of Afghanistan to be able to create a counterweight against the Taliban. Even if we wanted peace through negotiation, they will not take the opposition seriously until the opposition has not been able to challenge them and create a counterweight. So that's the only way forward, I guess. Resistance, armed resistance, coupled with civil resistance. And the civil resistance of the people of Afghanistan should not also be taken lightly. For example, the campaign of the gender apartheid campaign is a very, very important campaign. And that's why, I have tried my best to be, part of this campaign myself, because that is something that morally can challenge the Taliban. But we need moral challenge coupled with armed resistance to be able to challenge the Taliban. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to think about the processes that, for example, the UN lead, because the Taliban do not see themselves obliged to come and talk to the opposition or create what they call an inclusive government. So the only way is to strengthen both armed resistance and civil resistance. And I agree with Michael Semple when he says overall mobilization of the people of Afghanistan. And I hope soon, the region has learned its lesson. For example, countries like Pakistan have learned a lesson that the Taliban, which we kind of warned beforehand that they will bring instability in the region. Now they have been affected, and some Central Asian countries are affected. I'm sure Chinese and the rest will be affected soon, and hopefully they will become more susceptible to understanding the points that I'm making, and they will become cooperative with the acknowledging the armed opposition and the civil resistance of the people of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, thank you so very much for all this information. You have been working with different group of diaspora, and and I'm sure you have a very vivid picture of what is missing, what is there at the table already. So, Mr. Sarraj, Mr. Nashad just talked about a couple of very critical things that are missing, including a moral challenge to the Taliban ideology by the world, or a UN lead process or something like that. What do you think is missing at the moment?
Well, first of all, let me also touch upon some issues, of course. I agree in general with Mr. Nashad, and we constantly talk to each other, and we share our ideas. We are in a kind of agreement in what we say. But there are a few areas that I want to comment. First of all, the weapons and ammunition left behind by the U.S. forces. I think to some extent, the international community makes an exaggeration of that, because there were two different type of weapons. First, the light weapons. After the collapse of the Republic, the light weapons, a lot of them, were stolen from the depots of Ministry of Defense, and most of them were sold in the black markets in Pakistan. It was so fast that the supreme leader of Taliban had to make a decree saying that unless his authorization is there, nobody else is allowed to touch those depots. But it already vanished, and it already was gone. And some of those weapons, like M4, M16, the people who have worked with the Ministry of Defense, they know it very well, that the ammunition, you can only get it if you're a NATO member, or a NATO member country can supply you with those ammunition. So in fact, once the ammunition runs out, it's a useless weapon. You can't use it. So that's why they prefer Russian weapons more than the weapons left behind by the Americans, because it's so much in abundance in black market. You can find it as much as you want. And the second thing is the heavy weapons and like armored vehicles and so on. Even at the time of the Republic, a lot of them were not functioning. They are very expensive to run. They are very expensive to repair, and they are very expensive to maintain. Uh, and after 4 years of the Taliban, the majority of those vehicles are now like scrap. They cannot use them. They tried several countries to repair for them, but they couldn't do it. So that was one of the reasons that they resorted back to the Russian weapons, and they tried to repair and fix some of the abandoned Russian weapons from the past years. And Kandahar was the hub of that they collected the technicians and they tried to do it. The other thing, which is very important, I think, to the armed resistance and to resistance against the Taliban, to me, one of the things, the most important critical element that is missing, it is clear intent of the people. If the people have the intention to join their hands together and rise up against Taliban, Taliban will have a really difficult life. The strength of Taliban, it is the like the lack of coordination or the lack of unity among the opposition groups. So if we fix this problem, I think the Taliban will have a serious problem to face. And I also believe that the biggest income the Taliban have, it's from the uh, drug smuggling, it's from the cultivation, it's from the smuggling of weapons. They are involved in so many illicit business, and these businesses are producing for them or making incomes millions and millions of dollars. So I think the assistance they receive from abroad is important, but the biggest income that they have is just inside Afghanistan. That they have an abundance of those things. So overall, I want to just conclude it with one thing. As Sun Tzu says in his book, that to first know yourself and then know the enemy, you will not be defeated in 1,000 of battles. I think what we have a problem among ourselves is that we have not invested enough time to know ourselves, to know our failures, to know our shortcomings. And we have also not invested enough time to know the strength of the enemy and to know that what are the strengths of the enemies and what are the weaknesses. Once we do that, I think it makes our like goal easier to achieve.
Yes, sure. Well, thank you. And since you're unmuted, I would like to ask one of the questions that I received from the audiences in here from you before I move to Mr. Nashad for other question by the audiences. So one of the audiences is likes to know your opinion about the mosaic plan of UN, and they would like to know what do you think about that, because there are a lot of backlash about it, a lot of controversial over that. So what do you think about it? How effective it could be?
Well, one thing, the Taliban that I know, and I know them because that was the area of my business, and I had to investigate a lot about certain individuals in this group and their decision-making systems and so on over the years. Nothing will work against Taliban unless there is a serious armed opposition and unless they are under some kind of real pressure. Anything or any ideas that we talk about Taliban agreeing to enter negotiations with the opposition groups or anything that comes from the UN, United Nations, that they are painting some rosy pictures that you enter negotiation with Taliban and everything will be solved. These are just wishful thinkings. It will not happen. And anybody or anyone trying to waste their time following this path will not reach anywhere. It will just be a waste of time. So I'm sorry to be so direct in this issue, but my understanding is that it will not work. It hasn't worked in the past. Even when Taliban had only a few districts under their control, they were not willing to engage in any kind of dialogue with the Afghan government. What would be the reason? What would be the encouragement for them to enter negotiation with a group who are so disorganized, who are so who are not united, and who are not posing any serious threat to the rule of Taliban there in Afghanistan?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. So I have another question by the audience that I would like to ask you, Mr. Nishad. I mean, we talked about in so-called principled engagement. I mean, I'm so against this concept, but anyway, I want to leave my own biases alone. So one of the audiences is asking about, can conditional engagement with the Taliban over the women's issue be effective finally with the Taliban? I understand we have talked about it a little bit, but what is your opinion over that?
Thank you very much. I think in what I said in my comments, initial comments of 10 minutes that I tried to stick with 10 minutes, but it was 12 minutes. Basically, I mentioned there that there is a need for a systemic or structural change in Afghanistan, not the possibility of cosmetic changes or reform. We know the Taliban it is not impossible to reform the Taliban because of their ideology, as their leadership and their leadership has to be followed because of the bay'ah system that they're using and weaponizing in Islam. So we know that they are, for them, I mean, this was explained by Michael Semple, the evidence, he said the practice of the Taliban and the evidence in terms of their ideology explained in the book by one of the top members who has been inducted by the ICC, the head of the Supreme Court, Maulawi Haqqani. In his book, you can see that they completely justify gender apartheid. Also domination through sheer force. They say that any group that takes over a society by force, their rule is legitimate. So how you can engage with such a group in a conditional manner on women and try to reform them. So conditional engagement, basically it means that you put conditions, and those conditions, if they were met, then you will engage with them. And it means that they are not a group that which could be reformed. So I absolutely disagree with the possibility of reforming the Taliban. The comments that Mr. Sarraj just made about the need for challenging the Taliban, which was my initial point as well, through force, that's the only way. And he mentioned the issue, the problem of like disunity. Actually, these are the key points that we need to reflect a little bit. And I mentioned that among the opposition, there are some developments in terms of coming under one kind of, vision, shared vision, as well as platforms. But translating these into action is the problem.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for both of you for participating and for joining us today. So before closing the webinar, I would like to highlight some of the main points raised by our speakers today. And I was trying to take some notes in a very sloppy way, and sometimes I'm having a hard time to read my own handwriting, but I hope I can make some justice to what you just shared with our audiences. So starting with Mr. Sarraj, some of the main points that were raised was first, the reality that Taliban are hijacking the religion. So there is a huge need for understanding the authentic and the reality of the religion, for which we are hoping that our scholar and our a student put a little bit of focus on that. So also there is another point raised by Mr. Sarraj on the thing that we should avoid generalization of the fact that madrasas are increasing. That doesn't mean a student or graduates of these madrasas are extremists or are Afghan children or youth are extremists, and they are completely brainwashed by the Taliban. There is a huge differences and a division between different teaching. So Mr. Sarraj also touched on the danger of radicalization, which is real and it exists. He also talked about the different kind of a training and unpack the number of people and emphasize on the number of people engaged and involved in this training and madrasa. Although he believes that some of this number is a little bit exaggeration, but still we have millions of people in these madrasas, and that create a real threat to the stability and the security of the country and the region. And he highly emphasized on the future implication of all these radicalization training and hijacking the religion on the region, on Afghanistan and beyond. So going to Professor Simple, who's a great friend of Afghan and Afghanistan. I mean, he talked about one of the very important thing, which is in his opinion, one of the problem that Afghan nowadays have is spending a lot of time considering what international community do without Afghan agencies. And he unpacked Afghan agencies and lack of it in the policy making and shaping the policies a lot. I'm sure we have the recording and the audience can hear that later on. Professor also talked about currently Afghanistan has dropped down the priority list for many countries, and especially he talked on President Trump's administration, who has not adopted any policy on Afghanistan yet. And of course, a lot of other main issues, which I'm sure our colleagues in Bahrain will share with all the audience later to do a comprehensive report, and the recording will be available too. So Mr. Nashad emphasized a lot on Taliban are re-engineering the social and political structure of the country through several elements. And some of those elements, when talked by Mr. Nashad, was, gender apartheid, radicalization, and redefining social norms, among many others. Of course, he also talked about 23 to 25,000 madrasas, where 2 million boys are enrolled in those classes, and curriculums are highly influenced and designed based on the Taliban ideology and also extremist ideology, which is very, very dangerous. He talked about Taliban systematically marginalizing some of the ethnic and linguistic group of Afghan people according to him, by controlling language, they are controlling imagination of Afghan people, especially Persians. And a lot of they are having a lot of discussion over opposition group, what is missing, what is at the table, what is at the stake, and warning the world over the Afghan situation and how it can be a threat to the global security. So as we close our today webinar, so I really like to share these few other messages that I hear from my people from Afghan diaspora inside the country and Afghans outside the country. First, denying girls' education and indoctrinating boys is not just a human rights issue. It's really a security issue, and world is better to accept it and embrace it as soon as possible. Second, this system is not accidental. It's not wanted by the people and the people culture. It's designed and influenced by the ideology and imposed on people of Afghanistan. And finally, doing nothing, yes, is a choice, but it has a consequences, just like it had in 2001. So Afghanistan, yes, is somehow being left alone, but we have still our diaspora, our thought leader, scholar, and academia outside the border doing their work and trying to reshape Afghanistan future. So, and what international community chooses to do next will matter a lot for Afghanistan, for the region, for all of us. So thank you for our speaker and to the Bahrain Initiative for Development and everyone who joined us today. Thank you so much, and everyone have a good day.